The Iron Warriors are one of the 9 traitor legions of Chaos Space Marines, and they stand as a formidable testament to the treachery that marred the Horus Heresy. Originally known as the 4th Legion, their expertise lay in the art of siege warfare and the assault of static fortifications, skills that positioned them in fierce opposition and contrast to the Imperial Fists Legion, who were renowned for their impenetrable defensive constructs. This rivalry, fueled by their contrasting doctrines and the near mirror opposites that were their Primarchs, Perturabo and Rogel Dorn, played a significant role in the Iron Warriors' eventual defection to Chaos. Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, wasn't equal to Dorn in the realms of fortification and military strategy. However, his sense of betrayal and marginalization by his brother Primarch only deepened as the Horus Heresy unfolded. Dorn's proud assertions and victories were perceived by Perturabo as personal affronts even before the heresy, which inevitably drove a massive wedge between them and set the stage for their opposing stances during the Galactic Civil War. The Iron Warriors' obsession with cybernetic augmentation also reflected their grim dedication and obsession with warfare. Much like their counterparts in the Adeptus Mechanicus and even the loyalist Iron Hands, they were and still are notorious for their use of cybernetic enhancements. Something that does set them apart from almost all throughout the galaxy is that when they are afflicted by the mutagenic gifts of the ruinous powers, the Iron Warriors will often amputate the affected limb or body part and replace it with a mechanical prosthetic, a practice that underscores their commitment to functionality over aesthetics and control over raw, undiluted power. Perturabo's early life on the planet known as Olympia would be marked by relentless warfare between city-states, which would profoundly shape his approach to siege warfare. Discovered as an infant by the agents of Damikos, the so-called Tyrant of Lokos, Perturabo would be raised in an environment which bred coldness and mistrust. Despite his detached demeanor, he had mastered the art of siegecraft through his relentless exposure to Olympia's brutal and unending conflicts. These formative experiences equipped him with a deep understanding of both the theoretical and the practical aspects of siege warfare, thereby cementing his reputation as a master strategist and setting the stage for his eventual rise and fall in the annals of galactic history, along with his legion's own fall. When the Great Crusade reached Olympia in 849 M30 and Perturabo himself had the revelation of his cosmic destiny, a pivotal moment would occur. With the Emperor's acknowledging of Perturabo's prowess, he designated him as a Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, a declaration that led to the displacement of Perturabo's adopted father, Dakamos, and the integration of Olympia's most capable individuals into the 4th Legion. Under Perturabo's command, the Iron Warriors emerged as the preeminent siege specialists within the Emperor's forces. Perturabo's intellect was characterized by a cold and calculating demeanor, which was ideally suited for the intricacies of siege warfare. His proficiency extended not only to siege warfare, but to the knowledge of advanced technology, allowing him to engage in intricate discourse with the highest echelons of the ancient Mechanicum. Later, training on Mars would further hone the Iron Warriors' expertise, elevating them to the level of proficiency matched only by the Imperial Fists of Rogel Dorn. The Iron Warriors' methodical approach to warfare would prove to be devastatingly effective. Worlds that had previously resisted the Emperor's vision would succumb to their relentless siege tactics, which were employed expertly by Perturabo's Legion. The strategic mastery of siege warfare, which they exemplified, ensured the submission of numerous worlds to Imperial compliance, sparing them from the ravages of prolonged warfare in fruitless conflicts. Despite these advancements, Perturabo's sense of dissatisfaction and resentment grew greater and greater still. In an apparent bid to outshine Rogel Dorn and his other brother Primarchs, he would undertake increasingly demanding missions. These endeavors, while showcasing the Legion's formidable capabilities, exacted a harsh toll on the Iron Warriors. The relentless application of force, though efficient, eroded the resilience of even these transhuman warriors, marking a somber chapter in Perturabo's legion. The Iron Warriors' preparations for warfare were often marked and easily identified by their rigorous discipline and their affinity for sustained violence. This relentless drive led them to prefer facing defiant foes over surrendering enemies, seeking to unleash their built-up aggression through the complete subjugation of their enemies. Their preference for confronting defiant defenders became emblematic of their siege warfare approach, as they reveled in a troubling aspect which exemplified and was a cornerstone of their battle ethos. Compounding their unrest, the Iron Warriors were increasingly assigned as garrison forces, small contingents tasked with the protection of worlds that they had painstakingly brought into imperial compliance. This role, which was often rejected by other Primarchs for its demoralizing impact on their Astartes, would be reluctantly accepted by Perturabo. However, his dissatisfaction with the role would only deepen pre-existing grudges, fueling the ever-growing sense of grievances. Ironically, it was because he had been so cocksure in taking so many of the more difficult missions that he was assigned these more difficult missions, which caused both an emotional and a psychological turmoil within Perturabo. As the Horus Heresy loomed, Perturabo's frustrations had reached a boiling point, his mounting bitterness exacerbated by what some speculate were the manipulations of the War Master. It is suggested that Horus, not the Emperor, orchestrated the events and the deployments in order to rile up Perturabo's frustrations further. The situation reached a tragic climax when the death of Damikos, Perturabo's adopted father, triggered a rebellion on Olympia. Perturabo's response was one of unrestrained fury. Upon returning to his homeworld, he would extract a brutal retribution, resulting in the slaughter of countless innocents and the incineration of entire cities. The scale of his vengeance left Perturabo in a perpetual state of profound despair, struggling to grapple with the enormity of his actions. Before he could address the devastation that he had wrought, Perturabo was summoned to confront rebel forces following the War Master's virus bombing on Isstvan III. The Iron Warriors were commanded to enforce justice, a directive that marked their definitive turn to the cause of the traitors. The precise machinations by which Horus manipulated the Lord of Iron remained somewhat obscured by the sands of time, but the outcome was clear. The Iron Warriors were now irrevocably aligned with a traitorous cause. With their participation in the drop site massacre on Isstvan V, their fates were sealed. Once liberated from the constraints that had previously restrained him, Perturabo unleashed his destructive tendencies with a vengeance, laying waste to world after world in the service of the War Master. Under his command, the Iron Warriors carved out an empire of iron around Olympia and its neighboring star systems, while a fraction of the 4th Legion applied their formidable skills to the siege of Terra. This epic confrontation allowed Perturabo's Gene Sons to measure their prowess against those of Rogel Dorn. The outcome of the clash between the Iron Warriors and Dorn's masterfully designed defenses remains shrouded in hearsay, as the War Master's death precluded the final resolution that the Iron Warriors sought. The Iron Warriors who had participated in the Siege of Terra subsequently would retreat into the Eye of Terror with the other traitors. Simultaneously, those who had established their dominion around Olympia braced for the inevitable counteroffensive by the Loyalist legions, in an event that became known as the Great Scouring. In a dramatic twist characteristic of this era filled with grim tidings, the Imperial Fists, amongst others, undertook a siege of the Iron Warriors' holdings. After a decades-long campaign marked by relentless conflict, the traitors' forces were finally ousted from their domain, but not before the Iron Warriors detonated their nucleonic stockpiles, reducing Olympia to a wasteland of ruin and taking many loyalists out with it. One of Perturabo's most notorious campaigns, which is said to have earned him the dark favor of apotheosis as a Daemon Primarch, occurred on Sebastus IV. Here, Perturabo orchestrated the construction of the Eternal Fortress, a formidable bastion encircled by an elaborate network of trenches, redoubts, minefields, razor wire, These defenses were completely unlike traditional fortifications, which were normally designed to protect, were actually purpose-made to exact as large a toll from the assaulting forces as humanly possible, while providing the minimal amount of protection necessary for the defending forces. Ergo, the Eternal Fortress was conceived solely as a challenge to ensnare Rogel Dorn, and this iron cage was meticulously crafted to defy Dorn's vaunted skills and ensnare him in a trap which there was no escape from. Despite the entries of his brother, the Imperial Regent, Rabuk Guilliman, Rogel Dorn fell victim to Perturabo's challenge, who boasted that no one could breach his fortress. Dorn led the entirety of the Imperial Fist's legion into what would infamously become known as the Iron Cage. What ensued was a cataclysm of death and destruction of nearly unparalleled scale. The Imperial Fists, renowned for their resilience, faced losses so staggering that they rivaled those experienced during the height of the Horus Heresy. Trapped in meticulously orchestrated ambushes, they were subjected to the full measure of the Iron Warrior's strategic prowess. As the casualties mounted and the Imperial Fists struggled against the Iron Warrior's elaborate stratagems, Dorn's captains urged for a strategic retreat as they recognized the grim reality. The Imperial Fists had been outmaneuvered in a siege, which was an unprecedented blow, not just to their legacy, but to the Legion's morale. Dorn's resolve, however, remained unyielding. He could not bring himself to order a withdrawal, despite the clear and present need for one. In a dramatic turn, Rabuk Guilliman intervened. Unable to stand idly by while his brother faced complete annihilation, he dispatched the Ultramarines to relieve the beleaguered Imperial Fists. Confronted with the combined might of two legions, Perturabo chose to withdraw, having achieved his strategic objective and forever thumbed his nose at the Imperial Fists, who were left devastated. 400 battle brothers lost, with many more wounded and or permanently crippled. In a grim exchange, Perturabo offered the untainted gene seed harvested from the Imperial Fists to the Chaos Gods, which led to him receiving Apotheosis as his dark reward, turning him into the ultimate weapon he sought to be at the end of the heresy, when he had finally chosen to once more become a turncoat, intending to attack Horus Lupercal after his confrontation with the Emperor. In the 41st millennium, the Iron Warriors continue to plague the Imperium from their demon world of Medjugorje. Located within the Eye of Terror and commanded by various warsmiths, the Iron Warriors' warbands persistently seek new spoils and technological advancements, which has gained them a close alliance with the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum, along with the boons that would come from the aspirant god, Vashtor the Arcaphane, which has enabled them to deploy some of the most formidable and numerous armies of demon engines against the forces of the Imperium, perpetuating their legacy of relentless warfare and disruption. To be truly understood, the Iron Warriors' descent into chaos must be viewed from a more narrowed scope, going all the way back to the Solar Decades, where the Legion was used as a relentless battering ram during the Great Crusade. They were, in essence, a relentless force designed to breach every impenetrable fortress and dismantle any citadel that stood against the Emperor's will. And this fearsome reputation would be boosted by their merciless warfare and their unparalleled expertise in siegecraft, both defensive and offensive. Their Primarch Perturabo would amplify these tendencies greater still, as he was renowned to be both a ruthless and effective warlord, as his strategic genius was marked by a razor-sharp intellect that could discern the hidden vulnerabilities of any adversary and exploit them with brutal efficiency. As it seemed to Perturabo, defeat was an anathema, and he was willing to pay any price in blood to secure victory. Yet beneath this illustrious facade, there was a deep-seated discord and despondence within the 4th Legion itself. This internal strife was often fueled by any and all perceived slights, be they true or just illusions. It became increasingly apparent throughout the Great Crusade that there was a growing distance and mistrust between the Iron Warriors and all those other participants of the Great Crusade they once had championed. Perturabo's own bitterness and constant paranoia festered, which eroded the cohesion of his very legion, and when Horus's treachery was exposed post on Isstvan III, the Iron Warriors Legion was already in crisis, as they had been scattered across the galaxy and were still reeling from a brutal suppression of their own homeworld of Olympia. They were nonetheless quick to answer the call to confront the traitors, many of the legionaries believing that this would truly prove to the Emperor who they were. However, when Perturabo led the bulk of his legion to Isstvan V, their wrath was not directed at the traitors, but rather at those who remained loyal to the Emperor. The festering discontent within the legion would finally be reached, as the Iron Warriors' betrayal marked the culmination of their internal decay, and in the years that followed, billions would suffer for their dark turn. The 4th Legion, known as the Iron Warriors, had historically remained steadfast in adherence to their organizational structures, combat methods, and the equipment established for the Legion's Astartes, all the way back to the dawn of the Great Crusade. Remarkably, for many Terran years, the Legion did not incorporate any new cultural influences from their interactions with the Primarch. As a consequence, the Legion's approach to warfare remained largely static, as the Iron Warriors relied on their tried and true methods of relentless and meticulous applied force, overcoming obstacles with sheer brute strength rather than any innovative stratagems or dramatic heroics. This unwavering adherence to their original combat doctrine increasingly set them apart from their brother legions. By this stage of the Great Crusade, most other Space Marine legions had diverged significantly from their foundational Terran template, often displaying distinct and sometimes extreme traits in both character and warfare, whether or not they had been united with their Primarch. Two great examples of this would be the Revenant Legion, eventually to become known as the Blood Angels, and the Dusk Raiders, eventually to be known as the Death Guard. In stark contrast, the 4th Legion's consistency and pragmatism were seen by some as markers of their unimaginative and mechanistic nature. This perception of the Iron Warriors as being honorless and rigid was particularly evident in the eyes of their peers, including Horus himself, who nonetheless saw them within the higher echelons of the Great Crusade's own command structure, where these very traits were regarded as assets. The 4th Legion's reliability and willingness to adhere to the commands from outside of their own ranks made them a rather dependable force, especially when compared to the more esoteric and unpredictable legions, such as the White Scars, the Thousand Sons, and the Night Lords. The 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, would become the cornerstone of the Great Crusade's relentless military campaigns, all the while enduring grueling and often thankless tasks of attrition warfare. Their reputation was that of the Workhorse Legion, which was cemented through their consistent application of martial prowess and their undoubtable reliability in executing orders to the letter, almost to their own detriment. Unlike their contemporaries, such as Leman Russ of the Space Wolves and Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, or even Horus Lupical and his Luna Wolves, who resisted dividing their forces for the orders of lesser human commanders, the Iron Warriors showed no hesitation in accepting any lawful duty assigned to them. If they had been commanded to follow the orders of a mere mortal, the legionaries would, just the same as if they were commanded to follow the orders of a Primarch. They were frequently deployed in protracted sieges and campaigns that, while crucial for securing victory, yielded very little in the terms of glory and adoration. In addition, these laborious campaigns that the Iron Warriors undertook were the rather formidable tasks of garrisoning worlds deemed far too perilous for conventional forces, which demonstrated their role as both the vanguard and the shield of the Imperium. Their path was charted by the strategic imperatives placed upon them during the Great Crusade, as they advanced from one war zone to the next without any fanfare, drawing but the barest grim satisfaction from their essential but unheralded service. Over time, the Iron Warriors began to experience a subtle yet significant shift. Their formerly formidable numbers dwindled due to attrition, and their brother legions surpassed them in accolades and renown, as a gradual erosion in their standing was perhaps a precursor to the deeper rifts within the legion's Astartes. Their reunification with their Primarch further exacerbated the growing estrangement from their fellow legionaries, a fracture that would continue to deepen over time. From its inception, the Iron Warriors operated as a disciplined and relentless force, force, embodying steadfast resilience as their name would later symbolize. Renowned for their technological aptitude, they were amongst the most proficient of legions in integrating the technology and weapons provided to them by the Imperium. Although the 10th, the Iron Hands, often overshadowed them in the early years of the Great Crusade, the Iron Warriors' tactical preference was to strike from a position of overwhelming superiority and applying the maximum force directly against their enemies, which set them greatly apart from other similar legions. As the 4th Legion solidified its role as a primary fighting force, their methods would evolve to emphasize detailed pre-battle planning and the use of massive, sustained bombardments to soften up enemy positions before an assault. The Iron Warriors excelled in calculating continuous fields of fire, employing high-intensity shelling, along with deploying heavy armor and mechanized units to spearhead their attacks. This led to the development of one of their most formidable weapons, the artillery trains, which have lost use since the Great Crusade. Despite their cerebral and pragmatic approach to warfare, the Iron Warriors' stubbornness was equally pronounced. Once engaged, they would not relent unless commanded directly to withdraw by the highest authority, even in the face of severe setbacks or staggering casualties. This unwavering resolve would become a point of pride within the Legion, driving them to achieve victory through sheer discipline and firepower, regardless of the human cost. The Legion's most glaring demonstration of this paradox was the protracted and grueling campaign to liberate the Forge world of Encaldalon between 842 and 843 M30. Despite their victory, the campaign resulted in a near annihilation of the 8th Expeditionary Fleet's frontline forces, raising concerns amongst the Imperial Court and Primarchs. Critics would speculate that the Iron Warriors had deliberately courted defeat to showcase their determination and ability to complete their mission no matter what the odds. In part, this was because during this campaign, the Iron Warriors refused to withdraw, despite their initial assault unraveling due to an unprecedented enemy counterattack. They would, despite this, continue to adhere to their flawed and already failed battle plan, resulting in nearly 29,000 of their numbers falling in a single engagement. This battle proved to be one of the cruelest and most costly of the Imperium yet, with significant losses amongst the Legion's veteran units and the slaughter of over 2 million Imperial Army soldiers under their command. By the end of the decade, the 4th Legion had fallen from favor, their star dimmed as other legions rose to prominence. The successful yet costly campaign had marred their early successes, leading to the death of many of the senior command staff and commanders, and the decimation of their ranks overall. Although their gene seed continued to prove highly adaptable, being one of the most useful in turning those who were barely considered human into legionaries, which allowed for effective implantation and a quick regrowth in numbers, the Legion's numbers had diminished in comparison to their contemporaries. As the Luna Wolves and the Dark Angels outshone them in both glory and conquest, the 4th Legion awaited the arrival of their Primarch, now a diminished force in search of new purpose. Now, to understand how the Legion interacted with the Primarch, it is important to go back and have a brief overview of the Primarch himself prior to his integration with the Legion. And it all started when the Chaos Gods had scattered the 20 infant Primarchs across the galaxy from Terra. Within each of the gestation pods was a child. Within one of them was Perturabo, who would land on Olympia, a rugged planet characterized by the incessant conflict between multiple human states. The infant was eventually discovered by the forces of Damekos, the formidable tyrant of Lokos, while clinging to sheer cliffs beneath the city-state of Lokos. Intrigued by the child's apparent resilience and inherent skills, Damekos had the child brought before him. Eventually, in what mirrors the Greek and Roman tradition, the tyrant adopted the boy as his own, as he sought to nurture and educate Perturabo. Despite this, the child remained distant and unresponsive. Regardless of Damekos' efforts, Perturabo's interactions were marked by an unmistakable aloofness, reflecting the cold and meticulous, melancholic demeanor of the Primarch. However, his sharp intellect and formidable mind did not go unnoticed, as Perturabo quickly mastered every art, including the art of siege warfare, which was a discipline crucial to Olympia's warring states, which would provide ample opportunities for both practical and theoretical learning. Perturabo eventually would become close to his sister, the only one who he truly felt a kinship to. However, his brother was another story. His adopted brother was an artist in and of himself, filled with incredible talent for a mortal, but in comparison to Perturabo, he would often and almost exclusively fall short, much to the Primarch's glee. However, in one instance, said brother was challenged by Perturabo himself to create a great statue, and while Perturabo's statue itself was of unparalleled mechanical perfection, even Perturabo had to admit that his brother had outdone him, since his creation had a spark to it. This would enrage Perturabo, leading to a distancing from his family. However, his sister would continue to be a crucial part of his life. This would lead to her being the only one to be able to refer to him by a nickname, and eventually it would be the same sister who would join in on the rebellion on the planet. Eventually, Perturabo would take part in the Great Crusade. The transition was notably swift and rather seamless, in stark contrast to the often protracted assimilations of other Primarchs. It is probable that Damocos was rather keen to align Olympia with the emergent imperium, saw the release of Perturabo as a minor but beneficial concession. Perturabo, for his part, had already contemplated his own nature as an artificially created being, and awaited the eventual revelation of his creation and to witness his creator. His understanding, though abstract, was confirmed when the Emperor arrived in 849 M30 to reclaim his lost son and integrate him into the Imperium. Upon his initial integration, Perturabo had in essence decimated his own legion. But despite this, his intellectual prowess would be immediately recognized upon any of his remarks. While each of the Emperor's Primarchs exhibited an extraordinary capacity for learning and adaptation beyond that of any unmodified human, Perturabo's abilities were particularly notable even amongst his brothers, as he was quickly acknowledged as the most scientifically and technologically gifted of the Emperor's sons, with a ravenous intellect that set him apart from all others. However, Perturabo's brilliance was often turned inwards. From the outset, he was perceived as a rather detached and calculating figure, showing little interest in social interactions or in elucidating his actions and intentions. This guarded demeanor extended to even his own fellow Primarchs, his brothers, with whom he interacted with a particular and notable coldness and indifference. Despite these personality quirks, the Emperor saw in Perturabo a valuable asset, a formidable strategist, and a general whose relentless efficiency was matched only by his intellectual acumen. For Perturabo, warfare was a complex problem to dissect and solve, and it was not long before his formidable mind would unleash its full potential upon the enemies of mankind, demonstrating the fearsome power of his strategic genius. Following a period of intense collaboration with the Emperor, he absorbed the intricacies of the Great Crusade, which would lead to Perturabo assuming command of the 4th Legion, his own gene seed having been firmly implanted within the ranks. This transition of authority was executed with remarkable speed. At the time, approximately 35,000 Astartes of the 4th Legion had been mustered to form his independent command, with an additional contingent stationed across the Imperium in similar garrisons and detachments. Upon reviewing his legion's war record and doctrines, along with their practices and combat tactics, Perturabo found them lacking compared to their peers. His response was a brutal and unyielding edict of decimation. As stipulated, war is unequivocal, uncaring, and unforgiving, and it is also blind. Blind also will be the selection of those who pay the blood price for the great failure of your record. Under this decree, 1 in 10 legionaries was chosen by lottery to be executed by their comrades, a grim testament to Perturabo's utterly uncompromising approach. This drastic measure drew considerable criticism from the imperial court and his fellow Primarchs. Some feared the Emperor had entrusted a Space Marine legion to a madman, while others more restrained, suggested that Perturabo's command had come too soon, given his inexperience with the Imperium's ways. Rabut Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, was amongst the most vocal of detractors. He condemned the execution of valiant Astartes who had fought alongside his own legion, and this clash of opinions created a lasting rift between the two Primarchs, one that would simmer beneath the surface for decades later. Despite these objections, the Emperor's decision stood. The survivors of Perturabo's ruthless purge were left with a stark lesson. Under his rule, failure was met with death, and war was viewed as a binary equation. Perturabo's intolerance for mediocrity meant that simply being superior was inefficient. The Legion was expected to be unparalleled, perfect even. The irony of this would not be lost on those who would later view the kinship between the 4th and the 3rd. His goal was to transform the 4th Legion into an unrivaled instrument of war, and he would set about this task with a relentless determination that had characterized him so. His first test of this newly forged weapon would be against the forces of the Meretta cluster, where the Olympia Majoris star system was situated on the periphery. The 4th Legion's first significant trial under Perturabo's command came with a confrontation that would test their resolve like no other. Their campaign to integrate the Meretta cluster into Imperial compliance. As he was now leading this newly assembled expeditionary fleet, Perturabo charted a course directly into the heart of this cluster, targeting the formidable adversary he had long anticipated and waited for. On Olympia, tales of this enemy were shrouded in legend. Their perceived appearances on the planet every so often brought a horrific bloodbath and widespread enslavement of segments of the populace, leaving the populace scared and subjugated until their demands were met. These antagonists were known as the Black Judges, self-proclaimed arbiters of humanity's purity, who had extended their existence through ancient and malevolent technology. Once human, they had metamorphosed into decrepit entities, their frail bodies encased in mechanized warsuits, controlled by advanced cybernetic systems. The Black Judges' survival hinged on regular infusions of fresh human genetic material and viscera, extracted through a gruesome process that left their victims dead, essentially harvesting humans to prolong their own unnatural existence. From their fortress on a barren, raven-strewn moon known as the Rock of Judgment, they extracted control over a dozen human-inhabited worlds through fear, offering a malevolent form of protection from Xenos threats in exchange for constant tributes of young and healthy humans. Functionally, they were a little better than the Drukhari. The 4th Legion, still reeling from Perturabo's punitive decimation, was driven by a desperate need to prove their worth to their father. Their rage and frustration was now directed squarely at the Black Judges, who became the focus of their unending retribution. The assault on the Rock of Judgment was a direct and ferocious engagement. The moon had been heavily fortified, with defense laser batteries and swarms of fighter drones, which were akin to the technology used in the Dark Age of technology. That, along with the Black Judges' own warp-capable battleships, rendered this fortress a formidable bastion which had withstood countless assaults over the millennia. Yet, the unrelenting fury of the entirety of the 4th Legion proved overwhelming, and despite the Rock's staunch defenses, it fell before the relentless assault of the Iron Warriors, marking a decisive victory and creating the first in the brutal testaments to the Legion's wrath and determination. The Black Judges had been beings sustained by arcane and malevolent technologies, and they were truly formidable warriors. Each one had been encased in armor that was a form of life support, which were virtually impervious to bolter fire, and armed with razor scourges and ray cannons, akin to that of dreadnoughts, which allowed them to match firepower with the Astartes' most devastating tools, the dreadnoughts, and there were hundreds of them. Despite the overwhelming odds, the 4th Legion would hold their ground in each point of their assault. Even as they fell in droves, their bodies torn apart within their power armor, the Iron Warriors would continue resolute, unbreaking, and unyielding. as the darkness of the battlefield would only be intermittently illuminated by the muzzle flashes and the thunderous roars of an unending stream of weapon fire, mingled with the screams of the dying and the unearthly screeching of minds twisted by centuries of life beyond human sanity. The legionaries would have gone so far as to use the corpses of their own fallen comrades as cover from the relentless energy rays of technology far too advanced to deal with conventionally, as they repeatedly rallied to charge the Black Judges, enduring the deadly onslaught in order to plant crack grenades and discharge melta-blasts at point-blank range. For a time, the battle teetered on the knife's edge. In the confined vaults and corridors of their defensive strongholds, the Black Judges obviously had an upper hand. For every one that fell, a dozen Astartes would pay the price. It was in this dire moment that Perturabo made a decisive move. Observing the battle with superhuman intellect, Perturabo discerned the patterns and vulnerabilities within the chaos. He calculated the precise moment and location to strike for maximum efficiency. When he did, it was like a thunderbolt crashing into the ranks of the Black Judges, throwing them into disarray, as Perturabo, like a vengeful deity, tore through their lines. The power of the Primarch blasting and burning, ripping apart their machine frames as if they were mere toys, and tearing the withered bodies within these mighty machines from within his gauntleted hands. As the Black Judges struggled to regain and realign their defenses against the unexpected and devastating threat, Perturabo's further plans would unfold. The elite heavy weapon support units of the 4th, informally known as Havocs, advanced in precisely coordinated attack patterns. These patterns perfectly anticipated the Black Judges' responses with uncanny accuracy, almost as if Perturabo had been planning both sides of the war himself. The Havocs isolated and blindsided their foes, delivering a relentless crossfire of autocannon shells and plasma bolts, ending the Black Judges' tyrannical rule with merciless efficiency. By Perturabo's design, the enemy was annihilated without mercy, as the dominions of the Black Judges were stripped of every valuable resource and technology. Spoils of war, including wreckage and weapons, would be transported to Olympia. The secrets long guarded by the Black Judges would be shared with the Mechanicum in exchange for their technical and mechanical support. Within the Rock of Judgment, stripped of its resources, was an ancient orbital shipyard, which would be repurposed. These relics of humanity's long-lost interstellar conquest would be set in orbit around Olympia. Under Perturabo's direction, they would begin to construct a new and much more powerful generation of warships, combining the technology of old with the modern under the direction of the Iron Warriors. Following Perturabo's decisive overthrow of the vaunted Black Judges and the subsequent claim of their domain for the Imperium, he turned his focus to further conquests as he purged the Xenos ectosquirds of Varankia and subjugated the renegade knight fiefdom of Lixos, thereby completing his quest of the cluster in short order. In the final conflict, Perturabo's legion forcibly ended a millennia-long schism dating back to the Age of Strife between the fragmented empire and its former masters in the Mechanicum, thereby earning considerable favor with the Lords of Mars. This period marked a crucible of transition for the 4th Legion, a time of trials and rigorous testing under their Primarch's command. With calculated precision and savage experimentation, Perturabo reshaped his legion to mirror his own bleak and unflinching, ruthless psyche. By the end of the Meretta cluster campaign, the old 4th Legion was no more, as it had been reborn as the Iron Warriors, who were forged in blood and fire. In essence, they would be iron within and iron without. Upon returning to Olympia with his newly renamed force, the Iron Warriors, Perturabo's machinations were well underway. In alliance with the Mechanicum, the newly placed orbital shipyards and foundries blazed with frenetic activity. Some of these had been repurposed from the dead orbits around conquered stars, and they had been completely and utterly dragged and refitted, along with being repurposed to serve the Legion's needs, making them significantly more self-sufficient than many other legions. The worlds of the Meretta cluster now would pay a tribute in flesh and blood to the Lord of Iron, rather than to the Black Judges. However, this would be preferable, even by the standards of the Imperium, since there was a chance of the survival of the tribute, which would feed his legion's insatiable demand for fresh warriors, weapons, and munitions. Everything orchestrated by Perturabo's meticulous designs seemed to go off swimmingly until outside parties would interfere, as the Iron Warriors had been reshaped in the crucible of war, amplifying the traits already present within the 4th Legion, rather than altering them beyond recognition like the Revenant Legion had been. The traits that were seen as beneficial were amplified by Perturabo to further align with his own. Where once the Legion had been ruthless in its willingness to accept losses in victory, it was now driven to a point where such considerations were deemed irrelevant. War had become a precise equation, one the Iron Warriors were supremely equipped to solve. They had evolved into an unyielding engine of destruction, capable of sweeping worlds clean and devouring entire armies. At the head of the newly constituted 125th Expeditionary Fleet, Perturabo would command a force that quickly became known as the battering ram of the Great Crusade. As they fought alongside their fellow legions, in turn they earned an unmatched reputation for their brutal efficiency, a mastery of armored warfare, and their perilous artillery skills. It was said that no fortress built by human or Xenos could withstand the Iron Warriors' relentless assaults. No stronghold they could not storm, no army they could not drown in a torrent of shot and shell. As time passed, a wedge would be driven between the Iron Warriors and other Space Marine legions, which only would deepen, fostering resentment, pride, and paranoia within the 4th Legion, much like that of their own Primarch. Through his grim methods and savage example, Perturabo had instilled in his warriors a reflection of his own darkened soul. His suspicions and malevolent distrust, along with the callous indifference for life, grew alongside their ruthless determination, cold intellect, and the strength he sought to unlock within them. Given the 4th Legion's preference for open battle, its frequent deployment in siege assaults, what were renowned to be some of the most dangerous and unpredictable form of warfare the Imperium had often had to face, and its willingness to accept attrition as a price for victory from their Primarch to every last legionary, it is perhaps unsurprising that the Iron Warriors are estimated by many sources to have suffered the highest overall casualties of any legion during the Great Crusade. Yet it is a testament to the Legion and the cold, cruel genius of their master, Perturabo, that such losses were routinely absorbed without any significant long-term depreciation of their strategic fighting power. It seems that high casualties rarely resulted in any form of defeat for the 4th. Despite their genetically enhanced resilience to mental trauma and psycho-indoctrination, the continuous exposure to loss and destruction wrought a slow and bitter corruption of the Legion's psyche. Perturabo and his Iron Warriors sought no friends or allies amongst those who served with them, save perhaps for the Mechanicum agents who aided them in their quest for ever more powerful and effective means of waging war. In their fellow legions, they saw weakness bred by self-deceit, a lack of discipline, false mysticism, and vanity. They perceived all this as personal insults and slights towards them, both real and imagined. Even the many factions of the Mechanicum who marveled at Perturabo's technological intellect did not fully trust him or his legion, as the Iron Warriors' dangerous self-sufficiency and adeptness, coupled with their ignorance of the omniscience doctrines, only fueled their distrust. This was to the point that Perturabo brazenly insulted a Mechanicum's tech priest's beliefs and questions about his adherence and his knowledge of the omniscia, directly calling their faith into question. To the forces of the Exorus Imperialis, the host of the Imperial Army and its auxiliaries, the Iron Warriors' reputation was dark indeed. More than any other legion, the Iron Warriors were seen as willing to use the lives of mere humans and the auxiliaries as a strategic resource, expending them as cannon fodder to deplete the enemy's firepower. They would send sacrificial waves by the thousands to draw out their foes from their defensive positions and to gauge the enemy's strength by observing how quickly they would annihilate these forces. The repeated instances of this only served to further taint the Iron Warriors with their hated epithet of the corpse grinders amongst the common soldiers of the Great Crusade. Open mutinies were predictably and constantly suppressed through slaughter would continuously grow more increasingly frequent in war zones where the Auxilia was under the command of the Iron Warriors. To mitigate this corrosive effect on morale, War Master Horus issued a standing order to ensure that the bulk of such troops assigned to the Iron Warriors were indentured criminals or enslaved non-compliants. By the last solar decades of the Great Crusade, rivalries and simmering disdain characterized the Iron Warriors' relationships with other legions. Notably, the apathy between the Iron Warriors and the Raven Guards, sparked by frictions during the Iskander War and an increasingly bitter rivalry with the Imperial Fists, underscored these tensions. Even when fighting successfully alongside other legions, such as the critical war against Mashhog, the Iron Warriors' contributions were often met with indifference or guarded disdain. Despite Overdog Mashhog, vast orbital fortifications repelling the repeated attacks from the Space Wolves and the White Scars, Perturabo's plan succeeded in breaking the line, allowing the orcs to be slaughtered. Yet the contemporary chronicles of his brother's legions, Perturabo is recorded as merely another nameless comrade in arms. This growing schism, perhaps more apparent in hindsight, was further exacerbated by the War Master's Machiavellian machinations, as he would often both goad Perturabo by reassigning him to different deployments on the Great Crusade by essentially making them seem like issuances and directives, along with disposition orders from Terra, in essence bleeding the Iron Warriors and scattering its strength across a myriad of splinter and expeditionary fleets, thankless sieges, and garrison positionings in the more dangerous and isolated corners of the Imperium. All the while, the War Master would massage Perturabo's ego while talking him down to the other eventual traitors. Meanwhile, Perturabo's own 125th Expeditionary Fleet faced deadly foe after deadly foe, neither asking nor receiving reinforcement or additional resources, save for those it could generate and or acquire itself. Bitter but steadfast, Perturabo complied, demonstrating the iron will that was both within and without his legion. In retrospect, such events only served to foment and amplify the resentment and discord within the 4th Legion, further alienating it from the Imperium it served. This growing divide began to drain its warriors as they faced some of the worst horrors in the Great Crusade. Indeed, it is plausible that this was Horus's planning all along, wearing down Perturabo and essentially guaranteeing that one of his brothers would be an outcast that he could easily pluck into his service with a few words to stroke his ego. As the Great Crusade progressed, numerous Iron Warriors' citadels were established on liberated worlds, ensuring that secure lines of communication were maintained, and Imperial forces would be able to use these as both bastions and as relay stations for sensitive information. Small units of Iron Warriors would be garrisoned in these new fortifications, often in absurdly small numbers. One often cited example was Iron Keep Delgas, where a single tactical squad of 10 Iron Warriors was stationed, despite the world having a distinguished population of nearly 130 million people, while other Primarchs such as Leman Russ, Vulcan, and Magnus the Red refused to split their forces. Perturabo obeyed his orders with increasing bitterness. The Iron Warriors were being transformed into a garrison legion, with minuscule deployments scattered across the Imperium. Their undisputed success in siege warfare led them to be typecast, making them an automatic choice for any siege or garrison mission, while ignoring the basic needs of the legion's Astartes Astartes for rest and recognition. Resentment against the Emperor's relentless demands began to build not just within Perturabo, but throughout the entirety of the 4th Legion, particularly within Perturabo himself and those closest to him. The relentless attrition and ceaseless demands wore on the Iron Warriors, corroding the iron within and degrading their morale, all the while deepening an almost inherent sense of betrayal that they seemed to have. This simmering bitterness, coupled with their increasing isolation, set the stage for the Legion's eventual rebellion. More so than many of the others who would eventually turn traitor and side with Horus, the motivations and path to damnation pursued by the Iron Warriors themselves remains more nebulous than not. Only the history of the Alpha Legion, around whom little but lies circulate, is there a comparison. The once faultlessly loyal to their own detriment Iron Warriors did not merely bend, but it seems to outsiders that they suddenly and inexplicably broke, as their allegiance was shattered, unlike the iron that they so claimed to be. Many who view the matter with dispassion see, rightly or wrongly, a legion eroded by too much horror, too much attrition, and death in a service of a cause for which they went unheeded and unthanked. They see a Primarch and his sons slowly succumbing to suspicion and malcontent, and a growing madness that seemed to stem from isolation and unending despair. There remains scant evidence of wholesale corruption of the body or the insidious direct influence of the ruinous powers work amongst the Legion itself before its turn, let alone any of them actually trafficking with the dark forces before the cataclysm of the Galactic Civil War, which engulfed the Imperium. Some contend that the Iron Warriors' fatal flaw was a lack of faith at a fundamental level. They did not truly believe in the cause of the Great Crusade or the Emperor that they served, nor in themselves as anything more than machines built to kill. It might even be viewed that they were ultimately undone by the very pragmatism and logic that made them such ruthless and effective soldiers, which would also have left them ill-equipped to fight an enemy such as existential doubt and mortal terror. For Perturabo, his Primarch's mantle may have become nothing but a license for slaughter. Without a higher purpose, his conquests would be empty and his victories hollow. This view holds that the sense of emptiness was what ultimately denigrated and destroyed them from within, leaving nothing but an empty vessel to be filled with uncaring and savagery, along with the horrors that they bore. As the tragic outbreak of the Horus Heresy loomed, Perturabo faced ever-increasing pressures, and as his bitterness grew into a raging inferno, some suggest that it was the War Master Horus who time and time again engineered events, much like he did with Magnus the Red, and adjusted deployments in order to exacerbate the Primarch's psychological strain. For the Iron Warriors, the Horus Heresy was a culmination of a series of reversals and tragedies that had long plagued the Legion in the latter years of the Great Crusade, deranging and twisting its legionaries. Foremost amongst them was the Rebellion of Olympia, the seat of the Legion's domain in the Mataran cluster, and the founding homeworld of Perturabo. The death of the long-lived tyrant and the strap of Olympia led to a severe degradation in the planet's politics, igniting infighting and insurrection. The violence and division on Olympia were worsened by the changes wrought by the Imperium. After bringing the planet into compliance, discontent grew as generations of Olympia's youth were tithed to the 4th Legion, never to return due to Perturabo's own usage of their lives as merely pawns on a chessboard. The rebellion's shocking start struck at the heart of the Legion and its master, coming at the worst possible time. For over a whole 10 years, the Iron Warriors had been engaged in the nearly single-handed suppression of a major infiltration by the infamous xenoform known as the Herod. Such actions were costly in lives and sanity. This was no exception. In the midst of the cleansing of the Herod warrens on the world of Gun, the 4th Legion was notified that a rebellion had occurred on Olympia. It was Horus himself who broke the news to Perturabo that Olympia had risen against the Imperium, and that Demachos had died, along with that the population, fueled by years of anti-imperial propaganda, had taken up arms. By this time, Perturabo was already weary of repeatedly having to prove his worth. The thought of being a Primarch of the only Space Marine Legion unable to hold his own homeworld appalled him greatly, as Horus begged Perturabo to return to Olympia and presented him with a power hammer known as Forgebreaker, which some Imperial scholars believe acted as a conduit through which the ruinous powers could manipulate the Iron Warrior's Primarch. Upon his return to Olympia, Perturabo's long-repressed anger finally was unleashed, as the Primarch enacted a fearsome vengeance resulting in the wholesale slaughter of countless innocents and the burning of entire cities. Perturabo and the Iron Warriors would brutally suppress this rebellion, culminating in his confronting of his sister and the last and only person he truly seemed to care for. For his sister told him that people cannot be forced to live to an ideal. They must be led. People are messy and more complicated than your most profound calculations. You would build a perfect world, realizing at the final moments that its greatest mar were the people living within it. Now you would destroy them to save your creation. You are a memorable god. Bo, a tomb lord. You cannot achieve the impossible, so you rage like a child. And now you have unleashed horror upon us because he cannot accept compromise. Perturabo would reply by telling her that the people do not listen, they do not know what's good for them. And she in turn would state, people do not bow to you without love, without respect. Great tyrants rule with the blessing of their people, effective ones through fear, but no tyrant ever achieved anything through indifference. You have sulked your way to damnation. You refused to accept the love of the people. You were given the approbation of a god and an army to conquer the stars, and your first act was to decimate your legion. Perturabo would then reply, they had failed. And angrily she contested him. Failed to do what? Be the best? You waste your men to prove a point that needs no proof, and then grow angry when no one notices and praises your self-sacrifice. Your petulance has cost the planet whole generations of youth, bringing your legion up to strength again and again. You have been an absent king. You have not seen the empty schools, the haunted mothers, the husbandless women. And at this, Perturabo would just compare himself to the worst of his brothers, Conrad Kurz, which even his sister knew that it was a pointless refute, because she would go on to tell him, comparing yourself to the worst of your brothers to excuse the enormity of your own crimes. Listen to your words. Setting things right would be to cease recruiting and hear out the grievances of the people with forgiveness in your heart. Not this massacre. You slaughtered the delegation that came to see you, brother. In that moment you lost. You lost everything. This was a good place once. Bellicose and unfair, but it had its measure of beauty and nobility. You have destroyed it all. Why, brother? And at this moment, Perturabo seems to have cemented his siding with Horus by answering, I have other brothers now, my true siblings. I am not yours. After their argument, Perturabo would then kill his sister, cementing his loyalty to the traitors, not through the orders of another, but through what seems to be the Machiavellian plans of Horus Lupercal. In the massacre at Olympia, no one was spared. The Iron Warriors adhered to the principle of surrender or no quarter given, which they had grown accustomed to granting to none. Perturabo watched as the Olympian fortifications, which he once held in such high regards, would be overwhelmed. By the time the massacre concluded, Olympia had been reduced to slavery, as 5 million civilians lay dead. As the pyres burned through the long Olympian night, the Iron Warriors slowly grasped the magnitude of their actions. One moment they were humanity's heroes, assaulting the hideous aliens known as the Herod. The next, they were committing genocide against their own people. In the aftermath of this vengeance, Perturabo, who was consumed by utter despair, was barely able to comprehend the crimes he had committed in his petulant rage. He knew that the Emperor could never forgive him for his deeds. This tragedy drove the 4th Legion further into a private world of stark violence and bitter paranoia. The Iron Warriors' brutality would then intensify as things would go on, as they suppressed the worlds they garrisoned with renewed savagery, unleashing genocidal force at the first hints of open rebellion. Be they true or be they paranoia mattered not to the Legion. Many of their commanders grew increasingly unhinged and isolated from the imperium they had once served. Before Perturabo could contemplate atoning for his terrible actions, word would arrive of Horus's virus bombing of the remaining loyalists on Isfahan III, and the Emperor's ordering of the Iron Warriors to confront the traitors and bring them to justice.